Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we embark on a journey that begins not with a bang, but with a whimper. Imagine, for a moment, the year is 1815. You're not the master of Europe, but a defeated emperor standing on the deck of a British warship, the HMS Northumberland. The salty spray hits your face not as a symbol of adventure, but as a constant reminder of your gilded cage. The wind in the rigging whispers the names of battles you've won, Austerlitz, Jena, Borodino, but they sound like distant echoes now, ghosts of a past you can no longer claim. The ship creaks, the timber groans, and every shift of the hull feels like a sigh from the world you left behind. It's a very different kind of journey than the ones you took at the head of your Grande Armée. Those were about speed and conquest. This is about slowness and surrender. You're sailing towards a place so isolated, so remote, that the British government felt it was the perfect prison. You probably won't survive this journey with your ego intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The initial days of the voyage are a blur of sea and sky, an endless expanse of blue that only serves to emphasize your confinement. You're a man accustomed to the grandest accommodations, the Tuileries Palace, Fontainebleau, the Kremlin itself, and now your world is reduced to a cramped admiral's cabin. You find yourself sharing a relatively modest space with your small entourage, a handful of loyalists who have chosen to follow you into exile. There's General Bertrand, steadfast and melancholic, the Comte de Montholon, his motives a little less clear, and the ever-dramatic Comte de la Cassée, a man determined to record every cough and sigh for posterity. The days blend into each other with a terrifying monotony. You pace the deck, hands clasped behind your back, a ghost in a blue naval uniform, a subtle jab at your captors who have seen fit to deny you your own military regalia. The other passengers, British officers and sailors, steal glances at you, their former enemy. Some are curious, others are respectful, and a few can't hide a sneer of triumph. You're a curiosity now, not a commander. The small indignities begin almost immediately. The first is the sheer boredom. You, who once managed the affairs of an entire continent, now have to invent ways to fill the hours. You play cards, or rather, a rather simplified form of cards, as if even the rules of a game must be bent to accommodate your new, diminished state. You attempt to learn a bit of English, a language that feels as alien to your tongue as the food you're now served. You read, you tell stories, but the days stretch out, long and empty. The sea is a constant, humbling force, reminding you of the vastness of the world you no longer control. The British, for their part, are trying to strike a very particular balance. They want to be seen as treating you with dignity, as a defeated monarch, but they also cannot risk even the slightest hint of a return to power. The commander of the ship, Admiral Sir George Cockburn, is a shrewd and cautious man. He's polite but firm, always careful to refer to you as General Bonaparte rather than His Majesty. This is a deliberate, calculated humiliation, and it stings you more than any physical hardship. To be stripped of your imperial title is to be stripped of your identity, the very thing you spent your life building. You refuse to answer to the title of general, insisting on being called emperor. This sets up a petty, persistent power struggle that will define the rest of your life on that desolate island. Cockburn simply shrugs and continues to use the title he's been instructed to use. It's a classic schoolyard standoff, but with an empire as the prize. Historians still argue whether the British were genuinely concerned for Napoleon's comfort, or if their acts of seeming politeness were just a facade for a policy of deliberate psychological torment. On the one hand, they assigned you a doctor and ensured you had provisions. On the other, they subjected you to these constant, grinding humiliations. It's a bit like being invited to a dinner party where the host gives you a chair but then removes the tablecloth, the silverware, and your dignity. The journey itself is a psychological battlefield, not a physical one. You, the master of grand strategy, are now locked in a battle of wills with a naval officer over a title. The irony is not lost on you. One of the more quirky tidbits from this voyage comes from your personal valet, Louis-Joseph Marchand. In his memoirs, Marchand describes a peculiar routine. Every night he would present you with a fresh pair of white silk stockings, no matter how many you had ruined that day. This small, seemingly insignificant detail was a final vestige of your former imperial life a bizarre, poignant ritual of normality in the midst of a very abnormal situation. It's a tiny act of resistance, a silent protest against the dirt and squalor of a ship's deck. It's a bit like a modern-day CEO insisting on wearing a three-piece suit to a Zoom call from their attic, a small, personal way of maintaining a sense of self when the world has gone mad. The days wear on, and the heat begins to rise as the ship sails closer to the equator. You're a European accustomed to the temperate climates of France and Italy, and the oppressive humidity saps your energy. You start to lose a sense of time. The familiar constellations of the northern hemisphere disappear, replaced by strange, unfamiliar stars that seem to mock your disorientation. The ship, once a symbol of your escape, now feels like a cage, a tomb sailing on the endless blue. You're a man used to commanding a fleet, and now you're simply a passenger, subject to the whims of the winds and the currents. The destination remains a terrifying unknown, a blank spot on the map, a place you know only as a speck of volcanic rock in the middle of a vast, unyielding ocean. And the worst part, you have nothing to do but think. Think about the mistakes, the lost battles, the men you left behind. The ghost of Waterloo haunts you more than any British sailor ever could. The journey takes more than 2 months. The monotony is punctuated by a few fleeting moments of interest. A brief stop in the Madeira Islands, a glimpse of the African coastline. But these are just tantalizing glimpses of a world you can no longer touch. The final leg of the journey is the most difficult. The ship sails into a region of constant winds and rough seas. You're tossed and turned in your cabin, and the grandeur of your past life feels even more distant, more absurd. The reality of your situation sinks in with every lurch of the ship. You are not a visitor on this vessel. You are a prisoner, and your cell is the vast, boundless ocean. Soon, you will arrive at your final destination, and the quiet, psychological torment of the journey will give way to a different kind of suffering. The long, lonely voyage is almost over, but the final, horrific days are just beginning. The final days of the sea journey are marked by a palpable shift in the atmosphere aboard the ship. The monotonous blue of the open ocean begins to give way to something else, something jagged and dark on the horizon. It's a silhouette of a mountain, its peak often shrouded in mist. This is it. This is St. Helena. You stand at the rail of the HMS Northumberland, squinting into the morning light, and your stomach sinks. The island rises from the sea like a fortress, its volcanic cliffs a natural, impassable prison wall. There are no gentle, sloping beaches, no welcoming stretches of sand, just sheer dark rock rising abruptly from the water. It's the very definition of a desolate speck of land, a pinpoint of rock and guano, almost 1,200 miles from the nearest coastline. It's so isolated that it feels less like a piece of land and more like a punishment from a wrathful god. As the ship draws closer, the details come into focus. You can see the main settlement, Jamestown, clinging precariously to a narrow valley between the cliffs. The houses are a jumble of white and pastel colours, like scattered teeth in a gaping maw. It's a strange mix of the picturesque and the oppressive, and then you see them, the fortifications. Cannons are mounted on every strategic point, their black mouths pointing out to sea not to deter a naval invasion, but to remind you that escape is impossible. The island is not just a prison. It is a meticulously designed fortress, built to contain a single, terrifyingly effective man. You, of course. The wind, which has been your only constant companion for the past 2 months, now seems to carry a new sound, the heavy, echoing finality of your new life. The ship drops anchor in the harbour, and you wait. The British, ever mindful of appearances, are staging your arrival with a kind of theatrical, grim politeness. They want to show the world that they are not savages, that they are treating a fallen emperor with the proper, if diminished, respect. But the effect is cold and formal, like a funeral procession where the guest of honour is still alive. A smaller boat is prepared, and you are ferried to the shore. The journey from the ship to the land is short but symbolic. It's the final step from the world you knew to the world you will now inhabit. The splash of the oars in the water is a sound that will echo in your memory for years to come. As you step onto the jetty at Jamestown, you're greeted not by a cheering crowd or a military band, but by a quiet, curious assembly of British officers and local inhabitants. Their faces are a mixture of awe and pity. They have read the stories, heard the legends, and now here you are, a surprisingly small man in a green uniform, a far cry from the larger-than-life figure they imagined. A local dignitary, a functionary of the British East India Company, which administers the island, is there to receive you. His welcome is perfunctory and stiff. It's all very official, all very correct, and all very, very dehumanizing. You've gone from being the most important man in Europe to being a glorified piece of cargo. Your first residence on the island, a small 2-story house in Jamestown, is a temporary stop. You're only here for a few days while your long-term accommodations are being prepared. This first dwelling is a miserable hovel compared to your former palaces, but at least it's solid ground. You're finally off the ship, but the feeling of confinement is even stronger. The narrow streets of Jamestown are teeming with British soldiers, a constant reminder of who is in charge. The heat is oppressive, the humidity is thick, and the air smells of a strange mix of salt and volcanic dust. You're a man of action, of grand plans, and now your world has shrunk to a few square miles of rock. You're a caged lion, and everyone here is looking at you, wondering if you will roar or simply fade away. One of the more peculiar tidbits of St. Helena lore is the island's peculiar lack of natural wildlife. The most common animal is the goat, an animal you will become intimately familiar with. They clamber on the rocky hillsides, their plaintive bleating a constant, irritating soundtrack to your new life. This is a far cry from the hunting parties you once enjoyed in the forests of Fontainebleau. It's a subtle but constant reminder of your changed status, from the most powerful man in a continent teeming with life to a prisoner on a rock inhabited mostly by goats and the occasional seabird. It's almost a joke, one of those dark cosmic ironies you're now a part of. Historians still argue whether the British chose St. Helena purely for its isolation, or if they also considered its difficult, unaccommodating terrain as a form of psychological torture. While its remoteness was certainly the primary reason, the sheer bleakness of the place, the lack of vegetation, the constant wind, the omnipresent fog, cannot be a coincidence. It feels like a place designed to crush a man's spirit. You are a man who thrived on grandeur and action, and they have placed you in a world of smallness and stasis. It is not just about keeping you from escaping. It is about draining your will to live. The few days you spend in Jamestown are a taste of what is to come. You are an object of fascination, a strange tourist attraction. People come to stare at you, to catch a glimpse of the man who held Europe in his hand. You find yourself spending most of your time indoors, in the stuffy, hot house trying to avoid the prying eyes. You are no longer Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French. You're a spectacle. It's a humbling, infuriating, and deeply sad experience. You are surrounded by people, but utterly, completely alone. Even your loyal entourage, while devoted, cannot truly understand the chasm between who you were and who you are now. You are an empty vessel filled with memory, and the memories are now your greatest torment. Remember that long, monotonous voyage? It was just the prelude. The real performance, the slow, sad opera of your final days, is about to begin. The stage is set, a bleak volcanic rock in the middle of a vast ocean. The actors are in place, a deposed emperor, a handful of loyalists, and an army of British soldiers. The plot is simple, a slow, inexorable decline into irrelevance and death. The air is thick with the promise of misery. This is not the grand finale you imagined. This is not the death of a hero. It is the slow, quiet fading of a flame. As you look out at the grey, forbidding cliffs, you can't help but feel that you have not just arrived at a new place, but at the end of the world itself. The transition from the temporary house in Jamestown to your first semi-permanent residence is a brief reprieve from the public spectacle, but it marks the beginning of a new kind of indignity. You're moved to a small pavilion at a place called the Briars, a property owned by a local merchant, William Balcombe. It's an improvement from the claustrophobic house in town, at least in theory. The Briar sits on a lush green slope, a pleasant little oasis in the middle of a rocky, barren island. The air here is fresher, the view is a little more expansive, and for a fleeting moment you might almost feel a sense of relief. But the relief is a mirage. The pavilion is a single-room affair barely big enough for you and a few of your staff. This is not a palace, not a home. It's a glorified garden shed, a tiny, well-appointed cage. The humiliation is built into the very architecture of the place. You, who once commanded a palace with hundreds of rooms, now have your entire world contained within a space that would serve as a guest house for a minor lord. Your loyal entourage is housed in tents nearby, a stark reminder of their loyalty, and your diminished ability to provide for them. The situation is not just inconvenient, it's a deliberate psychological strike. The British know you are a man who takes pride in appearances, in grandeur, in the trappings of power. By denying you these, they are attacking the very foundation of your self-worth. You are no longer the Emperor Napoleon, you are General Bonaparte, a guest in a shed. The constant surveillance is another layer of your new reality. British sentries are stationed all around the briars, their uniforms a constant flash of red against the green grass. They are everywhere. They watch you as you walk, as you talk, as you try to read a book in a chair outside. Their presence is a physical manifestation of your captivity. You can't escape them. You can't ignore them. Every single moment of your life is now a performance for an audience of guards. And this is just the beginning. The constant gnawing feeling of being watched, of having every move and every word scrutinized, is a form of torture that's more insidious than any physical chain. It's a feeling you'll become very, very familiar with over the coming years. The most difficult humiliations, though, are the personal ones. The British authorities have assigned a sort of master of ceremonies to your household, a British officer named Captain Poppleton. His job, in theory, is to facilitate communication between your staff and the British. In reality, he is a spy, an observer, and a symbol of your lack of autonomy. Every request, every need, every little detail of your life has to go through him. If you want a fresh newspaper, if you need a new shirt, if you just want to take a walk beyond the immediate confines of the property, you have to get permission. It's a death by 1,000 paper cuts. You, the man who moved entire armies with a single command, are now reduced to asking for permission to do the most mundane things. It's enough to make a lesser man scream. You just clench your jaw and sink deeper into a sullen silence. One of the more quirky tidbits from this period is the strange friendship you strike up with Balcom's teenage daughter, Betsy. She's a spirited, vivacious girl who seems utterly unimpressed by your imperial past. She treats you not as a world historical figure, but as an eccentric, sad old man. She teases you, challenges you, and even attempts to teach you English, mocking your attempts at pronunciation. She is, in a way, a breath of fresh air, an antidote to the suffocating formality of your new life. Historians still argue whether her innocent friendship was a genuine comfort to you, or if it was just another reminder of the chasm between your current life and your glorious past. Was her playful mockery a welcome distraction or a painful echo of your lost power? Either way, she is a temporary and welcome aberration in your new grim existence. The simple act of receiving mail becomes a logistical nightmare and a new source of torment. All your correspondence is opened and read by the British authorities. Letters from your family, from your friends, from the few loyalists still in Europe. They are all subject to the prying eyes of your captors. They're looking for coded messages, for escape plans, for anything that could be a threat. But what they are really doing is violating your privacy, your dignity, and your last connection to the outside world. It's a blatant and total violation, a constant reminder that you have no rights here, only concessions. You're a public person, yes, but you're also a human being, and they have stripped you of even that basic level of privacy. Your health, which has been in decline for some time, also becomes a point of contention and humiliation. The British have a doctor assigned to you, a naval surgeon named Dr. O'Meara, but he is not a man you trust. You prefer your own physician, Dr. Antomarchi, but the British authorities place restrictions on his practice, limiting what he can do and what he can prescribe. This medical oversight is another form of control, another way to assert their power over your life, even over your body. It's a very modern kind of abuse, the slow erosion of personal autonomy under the guise of concern. You're not a patient, you're a captive, and your health is just another tool in their ongoing game of psychological warfare. As the weeks at the Briars turn into months, you start to feel the full weight of your situation. You're in limbo, waiting for the completion of your permanent residence, Longwood House. This period is a kind of purgatory. You're not yet in your final prison, but you're no longer truly free. Every day is a battle of wills, a new indignity, a small victory for your captors. You spend your time pacing, reading, dictating your memoirs to Las Cases, attempting to shape your legacy even as your present is being systematically dismantled. You're fighting a war not with armies, but with boredom, with pettiness, and with the relentless weight of your past. The humiliations are not the grand, dramatic kind. They are small, persistent, and soul-crushing. They are designed to break you down, little by little, until there is nothing left. and you can feel it working. The days at the Briars stretch out with a mind-numbing predictability. You are, for all intents and purposes, camping out in a glorified shed. The pavilion, as it's so grandly called, is a single room, but it's not even an entire room to yourself. It has been divided by a partition, giving you a small, cramped study and an equally tiny bedroom. The furniture is sparse and cheap. The walls are papered with a floral design that feels like a mockery of your imperial crests. It's the kind of place you might lend to a low-level diplomat for a weekend, not the final residence of the man who reshaped Europe. The contrast between your past and your present is a constant gnawing presence, a ghost that whispers insults in your ear every time you sit down on the flimsy furniture. Your loyal followers, Montholon, Las Cases, Bertrand and Gourgaud, are a constant, if sometimes bickering, source of company. They are a little court, but a court without a kingdom. They live in tents and in the main house, but they gather around you every day, attempting to maintain some semblance of imperial ceremony. They call you sire. They stand in your presence, and they listen with rapt attention as you dictate your memoirs. This small, sad pantomime of power is both a comfort and a source of profound sadness. It is a reminder of what you have lost, but also a testament to the strange, charismatic power you still hold over these men. They are here not out of duty, but out of a kind of shared tragic loyalty. Their presence is a warm blanket against the cold reality of your situation, but it's a blanket full of holes. The daily routine is a monotonous loop. You rise, you eat, you dictate, you pace, you read. You try to find something, anything, to distract yourself. Sometimes you go for a walk in the limited area you're allowed to roam, accompanied by a British guard, of course. You can't even stroll through a garden without a shadow. The beautiful, lush scenery around the Briars, which you might have enjoyed in another life, now feels like a taunt. The freedom of nature is just outside the invisible lines that confine you. It's a cruel irony. A world of beauty you're not permitted to fully experience. It's like being in a beautiful gallery, but being forced to stare at the walls from a corner. One of the more frustrating aspects of this period is the constant petty bickering among your own staff. The enforced proximity and the psychological stress of the situation have a way of bringing out the worst in people. General Gourgaud, a fiery, emotional man, becomes increasingly jealous of Las Cases, who is seen as your chief confidant and the official chronicler of your exile. This rivalry becomes a source of endless drama, a soap opera in miniature. They squabble over who gets to sit closest to you, who gets to take down your dictation, and who is the most loyal. It's a sad, undignified spectacle, and it's a further sign of how far you have fallen. You, who once managed the ambitions of marshals and kings, are now a referee in a squabble between two overgrown schoolboys. It's a very light joke, but you're not sure who it's on, probably on all of you. A curious little tidbit about your time at the Briars is the small, unexpected social life that develops. The Balcom family, especially young Betsy, becomes a constant presence. They're a lifeline, a connection to a world that isn't focused on your past glory or your current confinement. Betsy's mischievous energy is a welcome distraction. She once tried to play a trick on you, hiding something in your hat, but you were too quick for her. There's a strange, almost absurd normalcy to these interactions. You're a global icon of power and conquest, but you're also just a man, playing games with a young girl in a garden. Historians still argue whether these moments of human connection were a genuine source of comfort for you, or if they were merely a temporary balm on an open wound. The fact is, they provided a much-needed break from the grim reality of your situation. The most telling sign of your condition during this time is your increasing introspection and the obsession with your legacy. You spend countless hours dictating your memoirs to Las Cases, attempting to shape the narrative of your life for posterity. You're not just telling a story, you're fighting for your reputation. You're trying to control how you will be remembered, because you can no longer control how you live. This is your final battle, and the battlefield is not Russia or Austria, but the pages of a book. It's a quiet war, but no less ferocious. You revise, you edit, you pontificate, all to ensure that history will see you not as a defeated tyrant, but as a great man brought low by fate and the treachery of his enemies. You're writing your own epitaph, a long, detailed and utterly self-serving masterpiece. Remember how you were stripped of your imperial title. The British insistence on calling you General Bonaparte continues to be a source of constant friction, is not just a matter of semantics, it's a matter of dignity. You refuse to accept the title, and the British refuse to use any other. This is a stalemate that will last for years. It's a small, petty game, but it has immense psychological weight. Every time they call you general, it's a silent slap in the face. It's a reminder that you are no longer the emperor, but a man who was defeated. The lack of a grand title is a new kind of chain, a verbal one, and it's just as effective. You eventually get word that your new permanent residence is ready. You're told it is a grand estate, a place befitting your station, but you have been here long enough to be sceptical. You know it will be a cage, just a bigger one. As you prepare to leave the Briars, you feel a mixture of trepidation and a strange kind of relief. This place, for all its misery, was a kind of limbo. The true, final chapter of your imprisonment is about to begin. You say goodbye to the Balcom family, to the goats, to the endless winding paths. You leave behind the shed that served as your prison, ready to enter what will truly be your tomb. The move to Longwood House should have been a step up, but it only served to introduce the most persistent and tormenting figure of your exile. Sir Hudson Lowe, the new governor of St. Helena. He arrives on the island with a singular, terrible purpose: to ensure you never escape, to contain you in every way possible, and to do so with a cold, pedantic, bureaucratic zeal that is more infuriating than any open hostility. If Admiral Cockburn was the polite jailer, Lowe is the overzealous warden. You take one look at him and you know you're in for a bad time. He has thin lips, a rigid posture, and a nervous, shifty gaze. He's a man who thrives on rules and regulations, and you, of course, are a man who has always broken them. This is not going to end well for anyone, least of all you. The first meeting is a disaster, a masterclass in passive-aggressive hostility. He refers to you as General Bonaparte, with a chillingly polite insistence. You, of course, correct him, using your imperial title. The standoff begins, and it will never truly end. It is a war of attrition, fought not with muskets and cannons, but with words and paperwork. You refuse to see him, to engage with him, to acknowledge his authority, and he responds by tightening the screws of your confinement. He limits the visitors you can see, places ever more restrictive regulations on your movements, and constantly pestered your staff with bureaucratic demands. He is a man who loves the sound of his own regulations, and he is a man determined to make sure you suffer under them. Historians still argue whether Sir Hudson Lowe was simply following his orders to the letter, or if he had a personal, almost pathological hatred of you. There is evidence for both. His letters to London show a man deeply concerned with security, a man who saw you not as a defeated monarch, but as a dangerous, cunning military genius who might escape at any moment. But his actions on the island, the petty regulations, the constant surveillance, the deliberate attempts to humiliate you, suggest a man who took a kind of perverse pleasure in your suffering. He was, in a way, a perfect foil for your own grandiosity. He was small, bureaucratic, and obsessed with details, while you were vast, charismatic, and concerned with the big picture. This rivalry became a sort of bizarre, tragic comedy, a two-man show on a stage of rock and fog. One of the most peculiar and famous examples of this feud is the Napoleon Lowe garden incident. You, always a fan of gardening, decided to create a small garden at Longwood. You took great pride in it, ordering soil, planting seeds, and directing your staff in its creation. Lowe, seeing this as an opportunity for another petty power play, began to restrict access to the supplies, arguing that it was a security risk. It's an almost absurd scene. The most powerful man of the last 2 decades, a man who commanded an empire, is now locked in a childish squabble with a middle-aged bureaucrat over dirt. It's a very light joke, but you're the butt of it. He, of course, won this particular battle, and your garden remained frustratingly incomplete. The rivalry extended to the very fabric of your daily life. Lowe would read your incoming mail, often withholding letters from your family for weeks at a time, claiming he needed to vet them for security risks. He would demand that your staff give him detailed inventories of your possessions. He even tried to control the amount of food you could receive, arguing that you were eating too much. This kind of micromanagement was a new, insidious form of psychological torture. He wasn't just a jailer. He was a constant nagging presence, a ghost in the machine of your life, making sure every small convenience was a challenge, every simple pleasure was a fight. A fascinating tidbit from the memoirs of your staff is the story of your invisible boundary. Lowe had drawn a large circular boundary around Longwood House, beyond which you were not allowed to go without a British officer present. This was, of course, another indignity, but you, being you, responded with a kind of passive-aggressive genius. You would take your walks right up to the very edge of the boundary, a few feet from the line, and then turn around and walk back, a silent, pointed protest against his authority. You would look at the British sentries on the other side of the line, and the look on your face said, "You see? I am free to walk as far as I want. This line is in your mind, not in mine." It was a small victory, a tiny act of defiance that probably drove Lowe absolutely mad. The medical situation also became a key battleground. Lowe became obsessed with the idea that your personal doctor, Dr. O'Meara, was in league with you, plotting your escape. He demanded detailed reports on your health, reports that he would then second-guess and dismiss. The situation became so tense that O'Meara, a man of some integrity, ended up siding with you against the governor. This act of defiance, which eventually led to O'Meara's dismissal, only made Lowe more paranoid. He came to believe that everyone around you was an accomplice, a conspirator. He saw spies in every corner, plots in every letter. This paranoia was a mirror of your own, and the two of you were locked in a strange toxic dance, feeding off each other's suspicions and fears. The petty rivalry with Sir Hudson Lowe was in many ways the central narrative of your final days. It was a battle of wills between a man who was once the master of his universe and a man who was a master of his own small, sad bureaucracy. You could not defeat him with armies, or with clever diplomacy. You could only defeat him by refusing to be broken, by maintaining your dignity and your imperial stance in the face of his endless, grinding cruelty. It was a long, exhausting war, and it drained you more than any battle on a grand field ever could. He was not a worthy opponent, but he was a relentless one, and in the end, that was enough. Longwood House is not a grand palace, not even a mansion. It's a dilapidated farmhouse, damp and full of draughts, originally intended for a lieutenant governor. It has been hastily and poorly expanded to accommodate you and your retinue. The rooms are dark, the floors are warped, and the windows are small. The wind, a constant howling presence on this exposed plateau, whistles through every crack. This is to be your home for the rest of your life. The contrast with your former life is breathtakingly brutal. You are a man who once slept in the finest chateau of Europe, and now your bedroom walls are lined with rotting timber, and your bed is perpetually damp. It is a miserable place, and it's a misery that feels entirely intentional. But the physical discomfort is just a part of the punishment. The real torment is the constant, suffocating surveillance. This is the new normal. Every person who comes to Longwood is watched. Every person who leaves is questioned. The British sentries are everywhere, a tight ring of red coats that never breaks. At night they draw even closer, their numbers increasing, their patrols becoming more frequent. There are sentinels posted at every door and every window of Longwood House. You cannot go outside without being seen. You cannot look out your window without seeing a guard. You are a caged animal, and the cage is in the middle of a spotlight. The spying isn't just external. The British, and more specifically Sir Hudson Lowe, are convinced that there are spies within your own retinue. They suspect your staff of plotting your escape, of passing coded messages, of trying to undermine the governor's authority. This suspicion creates a toxic, paranoid atmosphere within Longwood itself. Your staff members are constantly being questioned, their mail is being read, and they are offered incentives to betray you. The paranoia is a kind of psychological acid that eats away at the trust between you and your loyalists. You know that Lowe is trying to sow discord, and you have to constantly be on your guard, not just against the British, but against the possibility that one of your own might crack under the pressure. A mainstream historical fact about your time here is the extensive, detailed journals kept by your retinue. Las Casas's Memorial of St. Helena, in particular, is an invaluable, if highly biased, source. He wrote about everything: your conversations, your health, your grievances with Lowe. He was in a way your chief propagandist, determined to paint a picture of a heroic, misunderstood emperor, suffering at the hands of his cruel captors. These journals became a kind of counterintelligence operation, a way for you to fight back against the British narrative that you were a dangerous lunatic. They were a way of controlling your story from inside the prison. Lowe, of course, was furious about these writings and eventually had Las Casas expelled from the island. The quirky little tidbit from this period revolves around the strange code of communication that developed between you and the outside world. Since all letters were read, your supporters in Europe would often send you books that contained coded messages. A particular word on a particular page might refer to a person, a place, or a plan. It was an elaborate, if not very successful, game of hide-and-seek. You were so desperate for information from the outside that you would spend hours poring over these books, looking for a hidden meaning. It's a very modern kind of story, a testament to the human need for connection and communication even in the face of total control. Historians still argue whether the level of surveillance on St. Helena was truly necessary. Was it an overreaction born of genuine fear, or was it a form of deliberate, gratuitous psychological torture? On the one hand, you were a man who had escaped from Elba, so the British had a right to be cautious. On the other hand, a few years into your exile, you were a clearly ailing, corpulent man with a small retinue on a remote, rock-bound island with a massive British garrison. The level of security seems disproportionate, almost theatrical. It feels less like a security measure and more like a cruel joke, a constant physical reminder of your utter lack of freedom. The spying also extended to your health. Your British doctor. O'Meara was in a very difficult position. He was a British officer, but he was also your physician. He became your unlikely ally, a kind of mole within the British system. He would often send reports to London without Lowe's knowledge, detailing your declining health and complaining about the poor conditions at Longwood. This infuriated Lowe, who eventually had O'Meara dismissed and then replaced him with another doctor, an Italian named Antomarchi, whom you never fully trusted. This constant changing of doctors, this tug of war over your medical care, was another part of the constant power struggle. Your body, your very health, was now a battleground. You, in turn, developed a kind of counter-espionage. You would have your staff deliberately send out false rumours, create red herring plots, and engage in elaborate theatrical displays of secrecy. This was, of course, to mess with Lowe's mind, to feed his paranoia. It was a small game, a way to reclaim a little bit of power in a world where you had none. You would hide papers, whisper in corners, and send your staff on meaningless errands, just to see if Lowe would fall for it. It was a very light joke, a very sad one, but it was all you had. The constant surveillance and the atmosphere of suspicion had a debilitating effect on your health and your mind. You became more withdrawn, more reclusive. You trusted no one. You spent more and more time in your rooms, pacing, dictating, or just staring out the window at the fog-shrouded hills. The world of spies and subterfuge, a world you had once commanded, was now your prison. You were no longer the master of the game. You were the grand prize. And the game, as you were beginning to realise, had no good ending for you. As the years bleed into one another at Longwood House, a grim reality sets in. Your body is failing. This isn't a sudden, dramatic illness, but a slow, inexorable decline. You are a man who once rode for days on end, sleeping in the saddle, subsisting on little more than ambition and a few hard crackers. Now, the simple act of walking is a chore. The corpulence that had begun to take hold on the ship now makes every movement a struggle. Your famously strong stomach, a thing of legend in your military campaigns, is now a source of constant, agonizing pain. You suffer from chronic indigestion, stomach cramps, and a host of other digestive problems that plague you daily. The damp, unhealthy conditions of Longwood House are a constant irritant. The walls are perpetually moist, and a faint, musty smell of decay hangs in the air. The draughts whistling through the ill-fitting windows give you a persistent chill. You spend more and more time indoors, wrapped in a dressing gown, sitting by the fireplace, even on warm days. The energy and dynamism that defined your life are slowly but surely being replaced by lethargy and a profound sense of weariness. You are no longer the man who conquered Europe. You are a sad, sick old man trapped on an island. Your mind, too, begins to show signs of decline. The quick, incisive wit that once captivated courts and commanded armies is now often clouded by bitterness and a certain kind of stubborn, petty defensiveness. The frustration of your captivity, the endless grinding rivalry with Sir Hudson Lowe, the loneliness, all of it weighs on your mind. You become more and more reclusive, spending days on end in your rooms, refusing to see your own staff or even to leave your bed. Your temper, always a fire in a tinderbox, becomes more volatile. You lash out at your loyal followers, then immediately regret it. The old fire is still there. but it's a sputtering, dying ember. One of the mainstream historical facts that many people forget about this period is the sheer number of contradictory diagnoses you receive from your various doctors. There's your personal physician, the Italian doctor, Antomarchi, who believes your illness is psychosomatic caused by the psychological torment of your captivity. There's the British doctor, Dr. Short, who is convinced you are suffering from hepatitis. And then there is a host of other physicians, all with their own theories, all of them fighting over your body like vultures. They are a kind of sad, absurd medical circus, and you, the patient, are caught in the middle. It's a very light joke, but again, on you. A quirky tidbit from this time is the fact that you became obsessed with the weather. You, who once paid no mind to a storm as you led a charge, now spend hours looking at the sky, lamenting the constant wind and the persistent fog. The weather becomes a kind of metaphor for your life, grey, bleak, and unyielding. Your spirit, once as expansive as the world you ruled, is now as narrow as the view from your damp little window. You begin to believe that the island itself is a living thing, an entity that is trying to kill you. The psychological toll of your exile is now being manifested physically. Historians still argue whether your physical ailments were a direct result of your captivity or if they were an independent disease that would have afflicted you anyway. On the one hand, the stress, the unhealthy living conditions, and the lack of proper medical care certainly exacerbated your symptoms. On the other hand, the autopsy will later reveal that you had a very serious long-standing stomach ailment, likely stomach cancer, that was not caused by your imprisonment. This question, was it the island or was it the illness, remains one of the central mysteries of your final days. It's a very human question, a kind of sad what if that will haunt your legacy. The decline of your health also becomes a political tool in the ongoing rivalry with Sir Hudson Lowe. You, and your loyal followers, use your illness as a way to expose the cruelty of your captivity to the outside world. Your Dr. Antomarchi sends a letter to your family in Europe, detailing your poor health and blaming it on the British. This letter becomes a sensation, a propaganda victory. Lowe, in turn, tries to downplay your illness, claiming that you are a hypochondriac, that you are exaggerating your symptoms to gain sympathy. Your body becomes a battlefield, and your illness becomes a weapon. It's a grotesque, sad spectacle, and you are the star. As your health deteriorates, your mind turns more and more to the past. You spend hours dictating your memoirs to your staff, trying to cement your legacy, to tell your side of the story. You speak of your great victories, of the code of laws you created, of your vision for a united Europe. You also, however, become obsessed with the idea that you were poisoned by the British. This is a paranoid delusion that will be a constant companion in your final months. You begin to suspect everyone, even your own staff, of being an agent of the English. It's a tragic decline from a man of such great intellect and foresight. The slow decline is a kind of living death. You're not a warrior, not an emperor, not a politician. You're a man simply waiting to die. The grand, epic life of Napoleon Bonaparte is over, and what remains is a sad, slow, quiet end. The battles are over, the campaigns are finished, the crowns are lost. What is left is a man and his memories, and the knowledge that every day his body is getting a little bit weaker, and his spirit is getting a little bit dimmer. The end is coming, and it's not with a bang, but with the quiet, persistent agony of a failing body and a broken heart. The final days are upon you. Your physical decline is a source of great anxiety for your staff and a matter of intense scrutiny for the British. The problem is, no one can agree on what's wrong with you. The medical atmosphere at Longwood House is less a place of healing and more a battlefield of competing and often bizarre theories. You're the subject of endless acrimonious debate between the various doctors assigned to you. It's a medical reality show, a very sad one, and you're the unwilling star. Your first official physician, Dr. Barry O'Meara, is an Irish naval surgeon who has a certain sympathy for your plight. He believes that your illnesses are primarily psychosomatic, a direct result of the psychological torment and the unhealthy conditions of your captivity. He argues that the damp, cold climate of St. Helena, combined with the stress of your imprisonment and the endless torment from Sir Hudson Lowe, is slowly killing you. He believes you need a change of scenery, a move to a healthier, drier climate. He documents his observations in detail, and his reports, sent back to London, often contradict the official British narrative. This, of course, puts him at odds with Sir Hudson Lowe, who sees him as a conspirator and a traitor. O'Meara's theory that your mind is killing your body is a deeply psychological and modern idea, and it rings true to you and your loyalists. But then there's the British doctor, Short, who has convinced you are suffering from hepatitis. His diagnosis is a very different one, focusing on a specific physical ailment. He believes your enlarged liver and jaundiced appearance are clear signs of the disease. This is a very convenient diagnosis for the British authorities, as it absolves them of any responsibility for your declining health. It's a natural disease, something you would have gotten anyway, and therefore it's not their fault. The battle between O'Meara's psychosomatic theory and Short's hepatitis diagnosis becomes a kind of political war fought with stethoscopes and medical reports. The quirky tidbit from this period is the utterly bizarre steam cure prescribed by a visiting physician. This doctor, whose name has been lost to history, suggested that you should sit in a box and have steam pumped into it, a kind of primitive sauna. The idea was that this would cure your various internal ailments by sweating out the toxins. The image of the once Emperor of France sitting in a wooden box with steam hissing around him is so absurd that it's almost funny. It's a very light joke on the state of medical science in the early 19th century, a time when doctors were still trying to figure out if bleeding a patient to death was a good idea. You, of course, found the idea ridiculous and refused to undergo the treatment, much to the frustration of the doctor and the amusement of your staff. A mainstream historical fact is the deep suspicion you held for any doctor sent to you by the British. You believed they were either incompetent or, worse, sent by Sir Hudson Lowe to poison you. This paranoia was not entirely unfounded. You were, after all, a man who had been the target of countless assassination plots throughout your career. You were convinced that the British were not just trying to imprison you, but to kill you slowly. This belief led you to rely on a strange combination of folk remedies, self-medication, and the advice of your loyal but largely untrained staff. You would take hot baths for your stomach pain, a remedy you had used for years, and you would eat certain foods that you believed would help you, even if your doctors advised against them. You were your own doctor, a very stubborn and uncredentialed one. Historians still argue whether your obsession with poison was a symptom of your mental decline or a genuine, if mistaken, belief. On the one hand, your paranoia was a very real part of your final years. You would only eat food that was prepared by your own servants, and you would never drink from a bottle that had been uncorked by a British hand. On the other hand, the later discovery of arsenic in samples of your hair lends a certain credence to your fears. The question is not whether you were poisoned, but by whom, and with what intent. Was it a deliberate plot by the British government, or was it, as some have suggested, a strange accidental byproduct of the medicines you were taking at the time? The debate continues to this day, a testament to the enduring mystery of your death. The medical circus at Longwood reached a fever pitch with the arrival of Dr. Francesco Antomarchi, an Italian physician hired by your family. You hoped he would bring some sense of clarity and professionalism to the situation, but his arrival only made things more complicated. He was a difficult, temperamental man who often argued with your staff and even with you. He was a skilled anatomist, but he had a terrible bedside manner, and you never truly trusted him. His diagnosis, like O'Meara's, was that your liver was suffering from the climate and the captivity, but he also believed that you had a host of other internal ailments that needed to be treated with a variety of purges and strange concoctions. You, of course, hated the taste of his medicines and often refused to take them. The end of your life was, in a way, a medical tragedy. You had a very serious, probably terminal illness, and you were surrounded by people who were either incompetent, suspicious, or engaged in a political game that had nothing to do with your health. The result was a kind of a slow, agonizing process of dying, made worse by the very people who were supposed to be helping you. The final days of Napoleon Bonaparte were not just a political drama. They were a medical farce, a bizarre, sad, and ultimately pointless struggle against an illness that no one could properly identify or treat. And you, the once great emperor, were just a patient in the middle of it all, a subject of a debate that would continue long after you were gone. The end is coming, and you know it. The pain in your stomach, once a nagging ache, is now a constant grinding agony. You can no longer eat, you can no longer sleep. You are a shadow of your former self, a ghost in your own home. The last few weeks of your life are a blur of pain, of fever, and of fading consciousness. The world, which you once held in your hand, has shrunk to the four walls of your bedroom. The conversations are no longer about grand strategy or the future of Europe. They are about your pain, about the weather, about the mundane little details of a dying life. Your final days are a series of vivid, often hallucinatory moments. In a brief spell of lucidity, you dictate your final wishes. You ask to be buried on the banks of the Seine, in the middle of the French people you love so much. This is a final, poignant plea for repatriation, a wish that will eventually be granted, though not for another 2 decades. You also make sure to leave specific instructions for your son, the Duke of Reichstadt, the boy you haven't seen since he was a toddler. You implore him to remember his father, to honour his name, and to forgive those who have wronged you. It's a sad, heartbreaking farewell to a child you know you will never see again. The night of May 4th, 1821, is your last lucid night. You are a man in a fever, your mind racing between the past and the present. You call your loyal staff to your bedside. It is a kind of last supper, a final gathering of the men who have stood by you through so much. You speak to them, and your voice is a hoarse whisper. You thank them for their loyalty, for their sacrifices, for their endless devotion. You tell them that you're ready to die, that you have lived a great life, and that you have no regrets. This is a moment of truth, a final, unvarnished statement from a man who has always been a master of propaganda. But the night is not without its bitter recriminations. Your mind, in its feverish state, returns to the people who you believe betrayed you. You curse the English, particularly Sir Hudson Lowe, for their cruelty. You condemn the Bourbons for their fecklessness, and you even, in a moment of clarity, lash out at your former marshals, the men who abandoned you in your darkest hour. You accuse them of treason, of cowardice, of a lack of loyalty. It's a very raw, very human moment. You are a man who has always believed in loyalty and duty, and the final days of your life are filled with a sense of profound betrayal. One of the most mainstream historical facts about your final night is the strange, almost theatrical nature of your final moments. Your doctor, Antomarchi, is there, along with your staff. They are all watching, waiting, documenting every last breath. There is a sense of history being made, even in this small, sad room. Your valet, Marchand, is there as well, a constant, comforting presence. He holds your hand as you fade in and out of consciousness. The air is thick with a mixture of grief, anxiety, and a certain kind of professional detachment. The British, of course, are just outside the door waiting for the inevitable. The quirky tidbit from this period is the final, bizarre request you make. You ask to be dressed in a military uniform, specifically the uniform of a colonel of the Imperial Guard. It's a final, defiant act, a way of reminding the world and your captors that you are, and always will be, a soldier. You are not a king, or a president, or a monarch. You are a warrior, a man who built an empire with a sword, and you will die with that identity. It's a small, poignant moment, and it's a beautiful, sad kind of theatricality that only you could pull off. Historians still argue whether your final moments were filled with genuine remorse, or if they were just the final, self-serving act of a man obsessed with his own legacy. On the one hand, your last words, France, the army, head of the army, Josephine, are a deeply personal, almost romantic summation of your life. They speak to the 3 things that mattered most to you: your country, your military career, and the great love of your life. On the other hand, the recriminations, the curses, the bitterness, all of it suggests a man who is still fighting, still trying to control the narrative of his life and his death. The truth, as is often the case, is probably somewhere in the middle. You are a complex, contradictory man, and your final moments were no exception. The morning of May 5th, 1821, dawns grey and misty. The storm that had been raging all night has finally abated. The air is still, heavy with a kind of post-storm quiet. In your bed, you are a still, silent figure. The breathing is shallow, ragged. And then, at 5:49 p.m, after a final, long, agonizing breath, it stops. You are gone. The end is not dramatic. It's not a moment of glory or a final, triumphant battle cry. It's just the quiet, sad, lonely death of a man who was once the master of the world. The news of your death travels quickly through Longwood House. Your staff, in their grief, are now left to deal with the aftermath. The British, in their stiff, formal way, are now in control. Sir Hudson Lowe, the man who tormented you for so long, is now faced with the most important task of his career: documenting your death and ensuring that your body does not become a new source of political turmoil. The rivalry is over, the game is finished, the emperor is dead, and now the most controversial chapter of your life is about to begin. The post-mortem, the autopsy, and the lingering mystery of what truly killed you will soon consume the world you left behind. The moment you draw your last breath, the true mystery of your final days begins. The air in your bedroom is heavy with grief and a palpable sense of anticipation. Your loyalists, led by Montholon, are devastated, but they are also focused on one final act of defiance: the autopsy. They are convinced that the English have poisoned you, and they demand a post-mortem examination to prove it. The British, of course, are happy to comply. This is their chance to put an end to the rumours once and for all. This is their chance to prove that your death was a natural one, a result of a pre-existing condition, and not the slow, deliberate work of a vindictive jailer. The autopsy takes place the next day, in your very own bed. It is a grim, almost theatrical affair. A team of British doctors, led by the chief surgeon of the British forces on the island, a man named Dr. Thomas Short, performs the examination. Your own doctor, the Italian doctor, Antomarchi, is also there, a reluctant and often difficult observer. The room is crowded with British officials, officers, and your own staff. It's a very public, very macabre spectacle, a final act of surveillance, even in death. The results of the autopsy are, at first glance, a clear victory for the British narrative. The doctors find that your stomach is riddled with ulcers and a large cancerous tumour. The cancer has spread to your liver and other organs. The official conclusion is clear. You died of stomach cancer, a disease that, as it turns out, ran in your family. Your father, as the autopsy report notes, died of the very same disease. For the British, this is the definitive answer. The post-mortem proves without a doubt that you were not poisoned. The rumours of a British plot are, they believe, put to rest forever. But your loyalists are not convinced. Dr. Antomarchi in particular is sceptical. He argues that while the cancer was certainly a contributing factor, it was not the sole cause of death. He believes that the poor diet, the constant stress and the unhealthy conditions of Longwood House exacerbated the illness and hastened your demise. His report, which is published a few years later, is a direct challenge to the official British one. He will argue that the British, through their neglect and their cruelty, effectively poisoned you, even if they did not do so with a specific substance. It's a very different kind of poison, a psychological one, but in his mind it's just as lethal. A quirky little tidbit that adds another layer of mystery to the story is the fact that during the autopsy, several of your organs were removed. Dr. Antomarchi, for example, took a piece of your stomach, which he later gave to your family in France. A British surgeon, a man named Arnold, took a piece of your liver, a portion of your intestine, and even your penis. Yes, you heard that right. A piece of your private parts. This strange, unsettling, and frankly bizarre act of souvenir hunting will become the basis for a whole new kind of legend, one we'll get to in a later section. It's a very dark joke, a kind of bizarre post-mortem insult to the greatest man in Europe. Historians still argue whether you were poisoned with arsenic. In the 1960s, a new kind of forensic science became available, and scientists decided to test a few of your hairs for arsenic. The results were shocking. Your hair contained extremely high levels of arsenic, far higher than what would be considered normal. This discovery led to a wave of new books and documentaries, all of them arguing that you were, in fact, poisoned. The poison, they argued, was not administered in one large dose, but in small, regular ones, perhaps in your wine or your food. This would explain the chronic, long-term nature of your illness, and the fact that you died of what looked like a natural disease. But the poison theory is not without its detractors. Other historians and scientists have pointed out that arsenic was a common substance in the 19th century. It was used in everything from wallpaper to hair tonics to certain kinds of medicine. Your doctors, for example, might have prescribed a concoction that contained arsenic, or the arsenic might have come from the wallpaper at Longwood House, which was, at the time, a very fashionable green colour that was made with a copper arsenic pigment called Shields green. So the question remains, was the arsenic a sign of a deliberate murder plot, or was it just a sign of the toxic and unregulated world of the early 19th century? The debate between poison and cancer is one of the most enduring mysteries of modern history. It is a debate that pits forensic science against historical documents, and it is a debate that will probably never be fully resolved. The truth, as is so often the case, is probably a complex mixture of both. You were a man with a serious terminal illness, a man who was also living in a period of time where poisons were common, and where doctors were, to put it politely, not as advanced as we are today. The final chapter of your life is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a complex, contradictory, and deeply human story about the intersection of a man, his illness, and the political and medical realities of his time. The post-mortem was supposed to be the end of the story. Instead, it was just the beginning of a whole new mystery. The autopsy is over, the official report has been filed, and you are laid out in a simple room, your body finally at rest. But the indignities are not over. In fact, a new, even more bizarre chapter of your story is about to begin. The post-mortem, in its grim efficiency, becomes a kind of macabre bazaar for your body parts. The most unsettling and strange of these souvenirs is, without a doubt, the removal of your private parts. A British surgeon, a man named Arnold, is the main culprit. He removes your heart and your stomach, which he gives to Antomarchi for preservation, and then he removes your member. He later passes it on to a priest, a man who has no business having such a thing, and from there it begins a long, strange, and frankly ludicrous journey through history. The story of your penis is a kind of dark comedy, a very light joke on the nature of celebrity and the human desire for morbid curiosities. It travels from hand to hand, from the priest to a series of collectors, each one more eccentric than the last. It is, for a time, displayed in a New York City museum, where it is described by a journalist as looking like a shriveled seahorse. This is, of course, an incredibly humiliating description for a man who was once the most virile and powerful man in Europe. The item, small and unassuming, is a testament to the fact that even in death, you cannot escape the prying eyes of the world. It's a very modern story, a kind of celebrity relic that is passed around and gawked at, a sad and undignified end for a man of such great stature. A mainstream historical fact about the disposition of your body parts is that the British government was, for a time, quite concerned about what to do with them. They were worried that if your body was returned to France, it would become a rallying point for your supporters, a symbol of French nationalism and a threat to the fragile peace in Europe. This is why they were so determined to keep you buried on St. Helena. They didn't want you to become a martyr, but they also didn't want to be seen as desecrating your body. The result was a strange compromise. You were buried on the island, but your body was not embalmed, which would have made it a lot easier to transport later. It was a kind of a bet on their part, a bet that your legend would fade with time, a bet, as we'll see, that they would lose spectacularly. The quirky tidbit from this period is the story of your stomach. Dr. Antomarchi, after performing the autopsy, preserves your stomach in a jar of alcohol. He takes it with him when he leaves St. Helena, and, for a time, it is a kind of a macabre show-and-tell item. He shows it to your family, to your supporters, and to anyone who will listen, using it as a kind of physical proof of the cruelty of your captors. It is a grotesque and unsettling object, a sad reminder of your final illness, but for your supporters, it is a kind of holy relic, a physical symbol of the sacrifice you made for France. It's a very morbid kind of tribute, but it shows the power of your myth, even in death. Historians still argue about the fate of your heart. The British surgeon Dr. Arnold removed it during the autopsy. He was a great admirer of yours, and he wanted to keep it as a souvenir. Your staff, however, was furious. They demanded that the heart be returned to them so they could bury it with your body. A compromise was eventually reached. The heart was placed in a jar of alcohol, and a small gold plaque was placed on it, with the inscription, a token of admiration from an English officer. The heart was then placed in the coffin with your body. But for years, there were rumours that the heart was not your heart at all, but the heart of some other random person. This is just another layer of the weird, spooky mythology that has grown up around your death. The bizarre saga of your body parts is a kind of a final, posthumous humiliation. You, the man who was so obsessed with dignity and appearances, are now a collection of scattered organs and a penis in a jar. It's a sad and frankly ridiculous end to a life of such grandeur, but it's also a testament to the power of your legend. People wanted a piece of you, a physical connection to the man who changed the world. They didn't want a piece of your military uniform or a piece of your furniture. They wanted a piece of your body. It's a testament to the fact that you were not just a great man, you were a kind of a relic, a living myth, and even in death, you could not escape the grotesque fascination of the world. The saga of your body parts is a very human story, a kind of a sad, dark comedy about what happens when a legend dies. The official announcement of your death travels through St. Helena with a swift, almost sombre efficiency. Sir Hudson Lowe, for all his animosity toward you in life, now finds himself in the role of a chief mourner. He orders a period of mourning for all British troops on the island and gives your staff permission to prepare your body for burial. The rivalry is over, and what remains is a kind of grim, bureaucratic peace. The question of your final resting place, however, is a new point of contention. Your loyalists, remembering your final wish to be buried in France, want to delay the burial. They argue that they must wait for instructions from Paris, from your family. But the British are not having it. They have their orders from London, bury you on the island and do it quickly. The location chosen for your grave is a small, quiet, and surprisingly beautiful spot on the island. It's a secluded dell near a small spring in a place called the Valley of the Geraniums. The name itself is a kind of gentle, floral irony. This is not the grand, monumental tomb you had envisioned for yourself. It is not the final resting place of a conqueror, but the simple, quiet grave of a man. The British are, of course, very specific in their instructions for the burial. They will not allow a tombstone with the inscription Napoleon, Emperor of the French. They insist on General Bonaparte. Your loyalists, in a final act of defiance, refuse to compromise. The result is a tombstone with no name at all. Just a simple, unadorned slab of stone. It's a final, silent victory for both sides, a stalemate that will last for years. The funeral itself, on May 9th, 1821, is a strange mix of military spectacle and profound sadness. All of the British military on the island and the entire population of Jamestown turn out for the procession. The British, for their part, want to put on a good show. They want the world to know that they treated a defeated monarch with the proper, if diminished, respect. A horse-drawn funeral carriage draped in a black velvet pall carries your coffin. The British troops, in their full regalia, march in formation, their swords reversed as a sign of respect. The British governor, Sir Hudson Lowe, rides in the carriage, a stiff, silent figure. The British artillery fires a salute every minute. It's a moment of bizarre theatricality, a kind of forced, grandiloquent funeral for a man they spent years trying to diminish. But for your loyalists, the funeral is a deeply personal and mournful affair. Your staff, dressed in black, walk behind the carriage, their faces etched with grief. They are a small, sad procession in the middle of a grand military spectacle. They are the true mourners, the men who know the man behind the myth. Your valet, Marchand, carries your heart, which has been placed in a silver urn, and your stomach, which has been preserved in a jar of alcohol. It is a very strange, very poignant procession, a mixture of the grotesque and the sublime. The solemnity of the occasion is punctuated by the sound of the soldiers' boots, the tolling of the church bells, and the quiet sobbing of your loyal followers. A quirky historical tidbit is the fact that the funeral carriage was not a hearse, but a simple, open-topped cart. The road to the grave was too narrow and too rough for a proper hearse, so a simple cart was used. This is a small detail, but it speaks to the improvised, almost slapdash nature of your final moments. It's a far cry from the grand, elaborate state funerals of the European monarchs. It's a kind of a final, subtle insult, a reminder that you were not a king, but a prisoner. Historians still argue whether Sir Hudson Lowe's actions during the funeral were a sign of genuine respect, or just a clever way of managing public opinion. On the one hand, he ordered all the military honours, which was not required. He could have just had you buried in a simple grave with no fanfare. On the other hand, he refused to allow the word emperor on your tombstone, which was a final, petty and deeply personal insult. The funeral was a kind of a Rorschach test for history, a moment that revealed as much about the observers as it did about you. Your body is placed in a grave that has been lined with brick and stone, a kind of a modest, above-ground tomb. The coffin is then sealed with cement and covered with a large unadorned stone slab. The entire thing is then covered with a simple, iron grate. It is not a grand, elaborate monument. It is a humble, simple, and surprisingly beautiful grave. It is a resting place that, for a time, will be a kind of pilgrimage site for your supporters, a place where they can come and pay their respects. It is also, of course, a prison, a place where your body is held captive, just as you were in life. The funeral is over. The soldiers have returned to their barracks, the mourners have gone back to Longwood House, and the island is quiet again. The reign of Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, is now officially over. But the story is not. The story of your death and your life is now just beginning. The myth of Napoleon, the legend of the man, is about to take on a life of its own. The legend will be bigger and grander and more powerful than the man ever was, and this simple, quiet grave on a remote island will become the birthplace of that legend. The story of your return to France, of your triumphant homecoming, is just a few decades away. The news of your death, when it finally reaches Europe, is met with a collective gasp. For 6 years, you had been a ghost, a myth, a man imprisoned on a remote island. But now, you are a martyr. The British government, in its attempt to bury you and your legend, has instead created a new, more powerful version of you. The myth of Napoleon Bonaparte, the tragic hero brought low by his cruel, unfeeling enemies, is born. The stories of your suffering, of your heroic defiance, and of the petty, bureaucratic cruelty of Sir Hudson Lowe spread across Europe like wildfire. The most powerful vehicle for your legend is the book Memorial of St. Helena, written by your loyal companion, the Comte de Las Cases. This book, published just a few years after your death, becomes an instant bestseller. It is a highly biased, deeply emotional, and utterly compelling account of your final years. It portrays you not as a tyrannical emperor, but as a misunderstood genius, a man of peace who was forced to make war, a visionary who was brought low by the combined might of jealous monarchs. The book is, in a way, your final, brilliant act of propaganda. It shapes the narrative of your life and your death for an entire generation. It turns you into a kind of secular saint, a figure of romantic tragedy. A quirky tidbit from this period is the strange cottage industry that grows up around your memory. Artists create paintings and sculptures of you as a Christ-like figure, a man of sorrows. Poets write romantic verses about your exile, your signature, your handwriting, a lock of your hair. All of these become priceless relics, sought after by collectors and admirers. The world, it seems, can't get enough of you. The cult of Napoleon is not just a political movement. It's a cultural phenomenon, a kind of modern-day celebrity worship. It's a very light joke on the nature of fame, a testament to the fact that you are not just a great man, but a kind of an object of obsession. The political ramifications of your death are profound. In France, the memory of your reign becomes a rallying cry for all those who are opposed to the restored Bourbon monarchy. You're no longer just a figure from the past. You're a symbol of a better, more glorious, more liberal time. The French people, who had grown weary of your endless wars, now remember you with a nostalgic kind of longing. They remember the glory, the power, the sense of national pride you gave them. They forget the cost, the endless conscription, the millions of dead. The legend of Napoleon is a very convenient one for a country that is struggling with its own identity. Historians still argue whether your legend was a genuine expression of popular sentiment, or if it was a clever, politically motivated campaign by your supporters and the enemies of the Bourbons. On the one hand, the love for you, particularly among the veterans of your army and the people who remembered your early, more liberal reforms, was very real. On the other hand, the books, the paintings, the poems, all of it was designed to create a very specific narrative, a narrative that served a very clear political purpose. The truth is probably a mixture of both. The legend of Napoleon was not created out of thin air, but it was certainly manipulated and shaped by a very clever and very powerful group of people. Your legend also takes on a very personal dimension. The story of your exile and your death becomes a kind of a pilgrimage for your supporters. They travel to St. Helena, a journey that is both difficult and expensive, just to see the spot where you died. They visit Longwood House, which is now a kind of a museum, a shrine to your memory. They see the simple, unadorned grave in the Valley of the Geraniums, and they are moved to tears. They feel a personal connection to you, a man who, in their minds, was the greatest man who ever lived. The island of St. Helena, which was intended to be your prison and your tomb, becomes the birthplace of a new kind of empire, an empire of memory and myth. The cult of Napoleon also has a profound effect on art and literature. The Romantic movement, which is just beginning to take hold in Europe, finds in you its perfect hero. You are the embodiment of the lone genius, the man who defied the gods, the tragic hero who was brought low by fate. Poets like Lord Byron and Victor Hugo write about you with a kind of breathless romantic intensity. Painters like Jacques-Louis David, even in their exile, create epic canvases that glorify your life and your death. You become a kind of a template for the modern, romantic hero. A figure who is both a man of action and a man of feeling, a man who is both a conqueror and a victim. The legend of Napoleon is, in a way, a triumph over death. The British, in their attempt to erase you from history, only succeeded in turning you into a symbol. They took away your crown, your army, and your freedom, but they could not take away your story. And your story, as it turns out, was far more powerful than any army, any crown, or any government. The cult of Napoleon is a testament to the fact that ideas in the end are more powerful than men, and your ideas, your memory, your legend are now loose in the world, a powerful force that will, in just a few decades, bring you back home. As the cult of Napoleon grows in Europe, the focus shifts ever so slightly from the father to the son. The boy you had to leave behind, the one you last saw as a toddler, is now a young man, a pawn in a game of empires. He is known to the world as the Duke of Reichstadt, a title bestowed upon him by his Austrian grandfather, Emperor Francis I. He is no longer the King of Rome. That title, that legacy, has been erased. He is a tragic figure, a prince without a kingdom, a boy with a name that is both a blessing and a curse. His life is one of gilded imprisonment. He is raised in the court of his grandfather, a man who saw you as a mortal enemy. He's given the finest tutors, the finest clothes, the finest horses. He's given everything but the one thing he wants, a connection to his father. His mother, Marie-Louise, a woman who has moved on with her life and a new lover, keeps him at a distance. He's a living reminder of a past she wants to forget. He's a boy, and you, his father, are a legend. He's not allowed to speak of you, to read your letters, or to have any contact with your family in France. He is a ghost in his own life, a living symbol of a man who is no longer a part of his world. A mainstream historical fact about the Duke of Reichstadt is that he was a man of great intelligence and a kind of sad romantic spirit. He was fluent in several languages, a gifted musician, and an accomplished student of military history. He was obsessed with your life, your campaigns, your victories. He would spend hours poring over old maps trying to understand your genius. He was, in a way, your last great admirer, your final great student. He was a boy who dreamed of being a man who dreamed of being a king who dreamed of being his father. But he was trapped by his circumstances, by the memory of a father he never truly knew. The quirky tidbit from this period is the strange, almost ghost-like friendship that develops between the Duke of Reichstadt and your old rival, the Duke of Wellington. Wellington, for all his animosity toward you, took a strange, almost paternal interest in your son. He would visit him, he would talk to him, and he would share stories of your military campaigns. It was a kind of bizarre posthumous reconciliation between two great enemies. It's a very light joke on the nature of fate, a testament to the strange twisted paths that history takes. Historians still argue whether the Duke of Reichstadt's death was a result of his own fragile health, or if it was hastened by the constant pressure and the profound sadness of his life. On the one hand, he was a sickly boy from the start, suffering from tuberculosis, a common and often fatal disease in the 19th century. His health had been in decline for years. On the other hand, the constant emotional torment, the sense of being a captive in a gilded cage, the knowledge that he was a living symbol of a lost cause, all of this must have taken a terrible toll on his fragile body and his sad spirit. The truth, as is so often the case, is probably a mixture of both. He was a boy with a bad illness and a heavy heart, and the combination was, in the end, a lethal one. The Duke of Reichstadt dies on July 22nd, 1832. He is just 21 years old. His death is a tragedy, a kind of sad, quiet end to a life that was full of promise but devoid of a real purpose. He's buried in the Imperial Crypt in Vienna, a kind of sad, silent monument to a boy who was never allowed to be a man. His death is a profound shock to your supporters in France. They had hoped that he would one day return, that he would be the one to carry on your legacy. But with his death, that hope is gone. The line of succession is broken. The empire is truly dead. But his death also serves to strengthen your myth. The story of the tragic, sad prince. A boy who was not allowed to be a man, a son who was not allowed to know his father, becomes a new chapter in the cult of Napoleon. He is not a hero, not a warrior. He is a victim, a martyr, a symbol of the cruelty of the European monarchies. His death, in a strange, sad way, becomes a final posthumous victory for you. It proves, to all who will listen, that the old empires, the ones that killed you and broke your son, are cruel, unfeeling, and unjust. His death is a profound, if unintended, act of propaganda. The story of the Duke of Reichstadt is a quiet, sad footnote in the epic of your life. He is a boy who was defined by his father, a man who he never knew. He is a boy who was a king in name only, a boy who was a prisoner in a gilded cage. He is a boy who died with your name on his lips. And his death, in a final heartbreaking act of historical irony, is the final sad piece of the puzzle that will, in just a few short years, bring you back home. His story is a testament to the fact that even in death, your power was so immense that it could not only shape the future of a continent, but it could also shape the tragic, sad life of your only son. The years following your death are a slow, torturous exercise in political manoeuvring. The cult of Napoleon has grown to such a point that the restored Bourbon monarchy in France is starting to feel the pressure. Your legend, once a source of comfort to the common people, is now a political force. The French government, in its desperate attempt to cling to power, tries to ignore your memory, but it's like trying to ignore the tide. The people are demanding your return. They want you home. The call for your repatriation is no longer a whisper, it's a roar. The political situation is complicated by the fact that the Bourbons, who are still ruling France, see you as a threat even in death. Your body, buried on a remote island, is a constant nagging reminder of their illegitimacy. They are a weak, ineffectual dynasty, and you are a powerful, enduring symbol of French glory. The British government, for its part, is also in a difficult position. They don't want to be seen as a cruel, vindictive nation that is holding a dead man hostage. But they also don't want to release you and see your return become a new source of political turmoil in France. The first major turning point in the repatriation story comes in 1840, nearly 2 decades after your death. The new French king, Louis Philippe, a man who is trying to legitimize his own rule by appealing to the public's love for you, makes a bold and politically savvy move. He formally requests that the British government allow your remains to be returned to France. This is a very light joke on the nature of politics. The very people who fought to put an end to your empire are now fighting to bring you back, all in the name of political expediency. The British government surprisingly agrees. The Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, a man who is known for his political pragmatism, decides that the political risk of holding your remains is greater than the risk of releasing them. The British public has also grown tired of being the jailer of the world's most famous dead man. The entire process, from the initial request to the final agreement, is a masterclass in diplomacy and political theatre. The British and the French, who were once sworn enemies, are now working together to repatriate you, a man who, in life, was the object of their combined hatred. It's a very strange, very modern kind of political love-hate relationship. A quirky tidbit from this period is the fact that the French government sends a young, ambitious prince, the Prince de Joinville, to St. Helena to retrieve your body. He is the son of the king, and his mission is not just a political one, but a personal one. He is tasked with bringing you home, with righting a great historical wrong. The fact that the royal family, the very people who replaced you, are now the ones leading the charge to bring you home is a kind of delicious historical irony. It shows how much the political winds have changed. The expedition to St. Helena is a very grand, very solemn affair. The French warship Belle Poule, a frigate with a crew of hundreds, sails to the remote island. The British government, in a gesture of goodwill, sends a warship of its own, the HMS Dolphin, to escort the French ship. The two ships, once bitter enemies, now sail side by side on a mission of peace and reconciliation. It's a very visual and very powerful symbol of the new political reality. The past, it seems, has been put aside, at least for a while. The exhumation of your body is a grim, solemn affair. Your loyalists, who have stayed on the island for all these years, are there to witness it. The tomb, which has been sealed for nearly 2 decades, is carefully opened. The coffin is then placed in a new, more elaborate coffin, one that is more befitting an emperor. The entire process is a very public and very respectful act of historical commemoration. The British and the French, in their own ways, are both trying to control the narrative. The British want to show that they are magnanimous and forgiving. The French want to show that they are the true heirs of your legacy. Historians still argue whether this act of repatriation was a cynical political move by a desperate king or a genuine act of historical reconciliation. On the one hand, Louis-Philippe was a shrewd and ambitious man who was very much aware of your popularity. On the other hand, the act of bringing you home was a profound and deeply emotional moment for the French people. It was a kind of a collective catharsis, a way of putting the past behind them and moving on to a new, more unified future. The truth, as is so often the case, is probably a mixture of both. It was a politically motivated act that also happened to be a deeply emotional and historically significant one. The long road to repatriation is finally over. Your body is now on its way back to France, a country that has been waiting for you for 2 decades. The ship sails away from St. Helena, leaving behind a place that was once a symbol of your imprisonment and is now a symbol of your resurrection. You are no longer the ghost of Longwood House. You are now the hero of a nation. Your return, a triumphal homecoming, is about to begin. The final act of your life, the one that you are not there to witness, is about to be played out on a stage of 1 million people, and it will be the greatest triumph of your career. The journey back to France is a kind of slow, deliberate victory parade. Your body, sealed inside a new coffin, is placed on the deck of the Belle Poule, and a constant stream of French sailors, officers and diplomats come to pay their respects. The air is thick with a kind of reverent silence, a shared sense of awe and solemnity. You're no longer just a dead man in a box. You're a symbol, a promise, a national treasure. The ship sails across the Atlantic, its course carefully planned to avoid bad weather and to maximise the public spectacle. The French government, in its eagerness to turn your return into a political triumph, has a grand plan. You will not just be returned to France, you will be returned with all the pomp and circumstance befitting an emperor. The entire journey is a kind of a performance, and you are the star, a silent, dignified hero coming home. The ship arrives in the port of Le Havre, and the scene is one of pure, unadulterated pandemonium. The entire city has turned out to greet you. The ships in the harbour are all draped in black. The streets are lined with cheering crowds. The sound of the cannons and the church bells is a kind of deafening roar. It's a moment of profound national catharsis. The people of France, who have been living under the shadow of your defeat for so long, are now finally, triumphantly welcoming you home. But the journey is not over. Your coffin is transferred to a riverboat, a kind of grand, elaborate floating sarcophagus, and it begins a slow, solemn journey up the Seine River. The riverbanks are lined with millions of people. They have come from all over France, on foot, on horseback, in carriages, just to get a glimpse of your coffin. They cheer, they cry, they throw flowers. They are not just cheering for a dead man. They are cheering for an idea, for a memory, for a sense of national glory that they believe you embodied. The journey up the Seine is a kind of a river of emotion, a kind of a national mourning that is also a national celebration. A quirky tidbit from this period is the fact that the riverboat that carried your coffin was so heavily decorated with imperial symbols, including a large golden eagle, that it almost sank under the weight. This is a very light joke on the nature of over-the-top funerals, a kind of a testament to the fact that the French, when they decide to do something, will do it with an almost absurd amount of flair. It's a very human, very French kind of thing, and it's a very fitting tribute to a man who was, in his own way, a master of flair. Historians still argue whether the return of the ashes was a genuine expression of popular sentiment or a cynical political move by a desperate king. On the one hand, the crowds were massive and the emotions were very real. The French people truly felt a sense of love and admiration for you. On the other hand, the king, Louis-Philippe, was using your return as a way of legitimizing his own rule. He was a man who had no real connection to the French people, and he was hoping that by associating himself with you, he could gain a kind of legitimacy by association. The truth, as is so often the case, is probably a mixture of both. It was a politically motivated act that also happened to be a deeply emotional and historically significant one. The riverboat arrives in Paris, and the scene is one of a kind. The entire city is shut down. The streets are all draped in black. The city is a sea of people, all of them waiting, all of them wanting to see you. The coffin is transferred to a grand funeral carriage, a kind of a magnificent ornate vehicle, and it begins a procession through the streets of Paris. The sound of the crowds is a kind of a low roar, a sound that is a mixture of cheers, tears, and a kind of shared collective memory. The funeral carriage passes through the very places where you once ruled, the very places where you gave your most famous speeches, the very places where you were a king. It is a kind of a final, posthumous victory lap, a last triumphant tour of the city you loved so much. The procession ends at the Arc de Triomphe, a monument that you had ordered to be built, but that was not yet finished. The monument, in its own way, is a kind of a symbol of your life, a grand, unfinished but ultimately beautiful tribute to a man who was always, in his own way, a work in progress. Your body is then taken to the Invalides, a kind of a military hospital that you had founded and placed in a temporary tomb. The final triumphant act of your life, the one that you were not there to witness, is finally over. Your return, after so many years, is not just a funeral. It is a kind of a second coronation. It is a moment when a nation, a people, and a legend are finally reunited. It is a moment when the ghost of Napoleon Bonaparte, the tragic hero who was defeated at Waterloo and died on a remote island, finally comes home. And it is a moment that will forever be a part of the history of France, a testament to the fact that you, in the end, were not just a man, but a legend, a myth, and a kind of a secular saint. The long, lonely journey from St. Helena is finally over, and your final, eternal rest is about to begin. The journey is over. The procession, which has been making its way through Paris for hours, finally arrives at Les Invalides, the military hospital and museum that you had founded. This is not just a building. It is a monument to French military glory, and it is the perfect final resting place for a soldier. The coffin, draped in your imperial flag, is carried into the complex by a team of your old marshals and generals, the very men who fought beside you in your greatest campaigns. It is a moment of profound symbolism, a reunion of a leader and his men, a kind of a final, posthumous victory lap. The coffin is then placed in a temporary tomb, a grand, ornate catafalque in the chapel of Les Invalides. The tomb is a magnificent affair, all gold and marble, a stark contrast to the simple, unadorned slab on St. Helena. The French government, in its eagerness to make a grand gesture, has spared no expense. They have commissioned a team of the greatest artists and sculptors to create a tomb that is worthy of an emperor. The temporary tomb is just a placeholder. The permanent tomb is still a work in progress. But for the moment, it is a magnificent, triumphant end to a long and difficult journey. The scene inside the chapel is a strange mixture of pomp and genuine emotion. The French government, led by King Louis-Philippe, is there in all its official glory. But the real emotion is in the faces of the old veterans, the men who fought for you, the men who believed in you. They stand at attention, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and pride. They are not just mourning a dead man, they are mourning an era, a lost cause, a dream that they once fought for. It's a very human, very raw kind of grief, and it's a beautiful, sad sight. A quirky tidbit from this period is the fact that your body, upon its arrival at Les Invalides, was still in surprisingly good condition, a kind of macabre miracle. When the coffin was opened for the final transfer to the new tomb, your face was still recognisable, your features intact. The British, in their medical incompetence, had failed to properly embalm you, and the sealed inner coffin, a kind of a lead-lined sarcophagus, had kept your body in a state of remarkable preservation. The sight of your face, after 2 decades in a tomb, was a profound and deeply unsettling experience for all who saw it. It was a kind of a final, posthumous act of defiance, a way of saying that even in death, you could not be erased. Historians still argue whether the location of your final tomb at Les Invalides was a deliberate political choice. On the one hand, it was a logical choice. You were a soldier, and a soldier should be buried with other soldiers. On the other hand, it was also a very clever political move by King Louis-Philippe. By placing you in a military hospital, he was subtly shifting the narrative. He was not burying you as an emperor, a political leader, but as a general, a military hero. This was a way of honouring your legacy while at the same time downplaying your political ambitions. The tomb was a kind of a political Trojan horse, a way of neutralising a dangerous political symbol by turning him into a harmless military icon. The work on your final permanent tomb begins almost immediately. It is a massive, ambitious project, a kind of a final architectural tribute to your life. The tomb, designed by the great French architect Louis Visconti, is a masterpiece of neoclassical design. It is a round, open crypt, and your coffin, a massive unadorned sarcophagus of red porphyry, is placed at the very centre of it. The crypt is surrounded by a kind of a colonnade, and the walls are adorned with massive stone-carved reliefs of your greatest victories. The entire thing is a kind of a secular cathedral, a place of worship for a man who, in his own way, was a kind of a god. The construction of the tomb takes years, and it is finally finished in 1861. By then, the political landscape has changed once again. King Louis-Philippe is gone, and a new emperor, your nephew Louis Napoleon, is on the throne. The tomb, a magnificent testament to your life, becomes a new source of pride for the French people. It is not just a place of burial, it is a place of pilgrimage, a place where the French people can come and pay their respects to the man who, in their minds, was the greatest man who ever lived. Your final resting place at Les Invalides is a kind of a final historical irony. You were a man who was obsessed with grandeur, with glory, with monuments, and your final monument, a magnificent triumphant tomb in the heart of Paris, is a direct result of the very same people who tried to destroy you. The English, in their attempt to bury you on a remote island, only succeeded in making you an eternal hero. The Bourbons, in their attempt to erase your memory, only succeeded in making you an immortal legend. The tomb at Les Invalides is not just a tribute to you, it is a monument to the enduring power of your myth, a myth that was forged in the fire of your defeat and hardened in the crucible of your exile. The tomb is finished. The body is at rest. But the story of Napoleon Bonaparte is far from over. It is a story that refuses to die, a story that continues to shape our world, a story that, in a strange posthumous way, is still unfolding. Your legacy is not a simple, monolithic thing. It is a complex, contradictory, and deeply human tapestry of ambition, genius, tragedy, and enduring influence. You're a figure who's both revered and reviled, a man who's both a hero and a tyrant. Your legacy, in a way, is a mirror that reflects the very best and the very worst of humanity. Your most enduring legacy, of course, is the Napoleonic Code. This legal framework, a system of civil laws that you commissioned and saw to its completion, is still in use, in one form or another, in dozens of countries around the world. It is a brilliant, logical, and surprisingly modern piece of legal engineering. It enshrined the principles of equality before the law, freedom of religion, and a merit-based civil service. It was a revolutionary document that, in many ways, swept away the remnants of the feudal age and laid the groundwork for the modern civil society. It is a testament to the fact that you were not just a military genius. You were a brilliant administrator, a man who was obsessed with order, with efficiency, with progress. But the legacy is not all good. Your endless wars, the wars that you fought for more than a decade, left a trail of death and destruction across Europe. Millions of people, soldiers and civilians alike, died in your campaigns. The entire continent was turned into a battlefield. The ambition, the genius, the obsession with glory, all of it came at a very high price. You are a figure who is both a symbol of French glory and a symbol of French suffering. You are a man who brought your country to its greatest heights and also brought it to its knees. The legacy of your wars is a dark stain on an otherwise brilliant career. A quirky tidbit that speaks to the endurance of your legend is the fact that you are still, to this day, a figure of fascination for millions of people. There are societies dedicated to your study, books written about every aspect of your life, and countless movies and television shows that try to capture your genius and your tragedy. You're a figure who has been mythologized to an almost absurd degree. The world, it seems, can't get enough of you. The obsession with your life, your triumphs and your ultimate defeat is a testament to the fact that you are not just a historical figure, you are a kind of a cultural icon, a figure who transcends history and becomes a kind of a living, breathing myth. It's a very light joke on the nature of celebrity and the human desire for a good story. Historians still argue whether your impact on Europe was ultimately a positive or a negative one. On the one hand, you brought an end to the feudal age, You spread the ideas of the French Revolution, and you laid the groundwork for the modern nation-state. On the other hand, you were a dictator, a man who was obsessed with power, a man who was willing to sacrifice millions of lives for your own ambition. The debate is not a simple one. It is a debate about the nature of power, about the relationship between a great man and his country, and about the cost of progress. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. You are a complex, contradictory, and deeply human figure, and your legacy is a reflection of that. Your greatest and perhaps most difficult legacy is the fact that you, in your own way, created the modern nation-state. You are the man who, for all your wars, spread the idea of a single, unified, and powerful state. You are the man who, in your own way, showed the world that a nation could be more than just a collection of provinces. It could be a single, unified, and powerful entity. The modern unified nations of Germany and Italy, for example, would not have been possible without your campaigns, without the chaos that you unleashed. You were, in a strange, sad, and beautiful way, the unintentional father of modern Europe. The story of your final days is not just a story of a man who was defeated. It is a story of a man who, even in death, refused to be silenced. It is a story of a man who, even from a remote island, was able to shape the narrative of his life and his death. It is a story of a man who, even in defeat, was able to triumph. Your legacy is a testament to the fact that a great man is not just defined by his victories. He's defined by his ability to endure, to suffer, and to, in the end, shape his own myth. Your final days were not a tragedy. They were, in their own way, a final brilliant act of a man who was, in the end, his own greatest creation. The journey is over now, you night owl. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte is finished, at least for tonight. You're no longer on the deck of a ship, or in a damp little room on a remote island. You are in your bed, safe and warm and comfortable. The ghosts of the past are gone, and what remains is just the quiet hum of your fan and the gentle darkness of the night. Take a moment to think about the man we just followed, the triumphs and the tragedies. He was a man of immense contradictions, a figure who changed the world and left it a very different place. He was a man who in the end was just a man, a sad, lonely and profoundly human man. Now close your eyes, let the story fade into the background and dream of better things. The world is quiet now. The Emperor is at peace, and you, my friend, are now at rest.